Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the Winter Spring 2024 class. This is our last office hour. You guys have been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed you as a class, and thanks so much for all of your incredible work and assignments and questions. The questions have been phenomenal. So just a huge thanks from me to you. And today what I wanted to do is take a quick moment to talk about a couple of upcoming things that folks might be keen on joining, because I think there'd be some interest there. So I'm just going to pop into the announcements here. And there we go. Got everything in there now. All right. So jumping right off. Um, I have been threatening to offer a business design course and then a design course, advanced design course now for close to a decade. I've had a fair number of students who've asked for this, and I think this is probably finally going to be the time. So I'm going to be offering both permaculture pathways. So what kind of business might you get into? It'll be twice a month for 6 months. The first one will be a content presentation. So it'll be specific about what to do at this point within the development of your business. We'll have open Q&A. And then the second one will be a case study interview. So it'll be with an existing business. We'll talk to them, chat with them. We're going to focus on your current skills, likes, and local problems to see if we can find a good place for you for your business. Assessing and building a plan for your desired business and required skills. This is really important. I picked this up years ago working with trade schools. So trade schools created something called developing a curriculum chart. And basically when the plumber leaves, here's all the skills they need to have. And they walk them back all the way to the beginning. And so with anybody who I'm working with right now, I'm working with 6 different clients, most of them former students who are going into earthworks, permaculture design, specifically design, not installation, due to a back injury, a soil food web consultant. The new one, I don't know. I think he wants to do a business. He's been in the film industry for a number of years. And then somebody who's specifically going into rainwater harvesting. And basically we develop the skill set that they need. And that way you've got a plan specific to you, what you need to go and build. We talk about the 3 stools, the 3 legs of the stool for business, which is craft. So that's the technician, reputation, telling your story, and then having good business systems. And then the big focus is on developing a product or service to launch in that first year. And then you can continue to stay in that community as it develops. Tentatively, I'm looking at launching that in July. And then the second one will be specific to advanced regenerative land design. So in that, we'll go through my process, my conversation. I will share with you, because I am unique in the space that I talk to a number of different designers and work with a number of designers. I know a lot of different design approaches. I'll share what I know. I'm not saying this is the everything course. It's going to be everything I know about it. Similarly, first session will be content. So we'll start at the beginning of where I start with my design process, and we'll basically walk through the whole thing by the end. The second session, we're going to interview different established designers and chat with them. We're going to focus on sharing design process, tools, and practices. We're going to focus on process versus a recipe. You'll have my recipe of how I do it, but it'll really be about you forming your process and how to go deeper into specific context. Great thing about that one is any question about specific design, or if you want to take your design further from the PDC, it's a great place to start. Again, option to stay in the community after 6 months, and that's tentative, again, July 2024. There's the form if you want to sign up to be notified if that goes ahead. This next one is a fun one. I've been working in something called values-based decision-making for years. It's based on holistic management. And this is sort of the lowest hors d'oeuvre. This is the simplest hors d'oeuvre to introduce people into how to develop a way of decision-making that's based on your values. So you basically forecast into the future about your business, your life, your relationship. In this, we're going to focus on productivity. What do you want to be true? And then we hold a value, and we use that value to proof any decisions. So I'm really excited about this one. This should be a really fun course, and that'll be starting up in July, very quick. And then the last one you might want to be interested in, and I would highly recommend, if you haven't taken call it a biological view to soils course yet. And the PDC is a great introduction to it, but getting into the nitty gritty is important. Joe Tobias of Root Shoot Soil, who's been a living soil food web consultant for years, is going to be leading this course. This is the course that started the Regenerative Living online educational platform. And it's going to be fun. So we're going to go from November to January. We're going to have a few weeks off over Christmas, and we're going to be meeting weekly. So check out that if you're keen to jump into that as a as a soil course. Any questions about those courses before I go into questions today? Questions, comments, queries, quotations? Cool. As this is our last session together, any question under the sun, if you want to talk about business, what to do next, where to go next in your permaculture education specific to you, or general conversation, please do. Leon brought in some great questions that we're going to jump into. What percentage of your work is remote from home? So I'm guessing, Leon, you were talking about land design. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So land design, because I'm now in Ecuador, is roughly 80% remote, with 20% in person. In Canada, it was about 50-60. So I had a lot of clients who would say, hey, could you come walk the land and tell me your thoughts? Which was great. It's one of my favorite things to do, right behind land assessment. So pre-purchase land assessment is one of my, if not my favorite thing to do, because basically I get to take a look at something and just tell people why it's great and why it sucks. And it's fun. It's just like, oh, look, there's water flowing directly towards the house. Have you checked the basement? I did. It's terrible. Uh-huh. Or are the downspouts, do they empty right beside the house? Uh-huh. Is there water damage? Yeah. Okay. So those are the, like, there's a whole list of different services you can provide, but in terms of land design, it's roughly 80% remote. There's a couple of African potentialities, which would, it depends on the percentage. If we're talking about a year, or if we're talking about a day, when and if I go to Africa next, it's going to be 2 months of design nonstop. So it'll be, 100% full time. And, of the year, it might be close to 20, but when you have to visit a site, how do you invoice it? So this is more of what the site visit looks like. So site visit is usually a consulting rate. So it's a day rate of just being on site and then seeing what I see and conversing with clients. Usually what clients will do is they'll bring a notebook, they'll make tons of notes as I'm talking about things. Sometimes they'll throw a phone on me just so I'm recording throughout the whole day. It's not great at the end of the day because they have to go through like 6 hours of recording. So they think it's a good idea, but it's not really. Then there's usually a travel day rate to get there and come back. And then there's travel expenses. So that can be getting to the airport or driving there. I basically, when I was in Canada, I was doing mileage rates. So whatever the Canadian government was proposing for mileage that year, that would be my mileage. If it's an overnight, there's also room and board and food costs, things of that nature. I prefer 2 site visits, but I'll do a minimum of 1. It's one of the reasons why right at the beginning when we started talking, I told everybody about GPS Kit and Gaia GPS, because that's a great way to get clients to start to show you the site before you get there so you can start to see what it looks like. In terms of plant costs, so there's 3 ways to go. These are the 2 that make you money. The first is you can add a percentage, which is what it sounds like this guy does. 200% markup is insane.
Yeah.
I don't usually do that. That's a little too much for me. So when I was doing plant material, I had a small nursery, so I supplied a lot of it. And the other thing I did is I would just charge them for the time it took me to arrange. So I would just take my design hourly, and however long it took me to get it, that's what the cost was. That to me was fairer than adding just a blanket percentage onto the plant material. The other thing I've done is told them what the difference could be. And the only reason for this is that getting the plant material that's on the list can be 90% of the work in an installation, because it's usually so hard to find. You have to go back multiple times. You have to talk to people. So generally, I tell people it's going to be expensive if you get me to manage it. But if I just tell you what to get, which will be an hour or 2 of my time, and you can go off and get it, I don't have to manage it. And I also don't have to worry about any of that. The thing that I came to after working in construction for 10 years and then this work is I don't pick up a plant until I have full deposit. I just don't do it anymore. I don't manage other people's money. And when people have an issue with it, I just tell them, I don't manage your money. I'm not doing it. You want me to manage your money? There's a much higher cost for me managing your money because I don't want to do it. So if folks basically, the last job we did, think the plant material was close to 15K. I was like, great, I need the 15,000, I need the 15,000 plus I need half of the management fees, the design fees up front. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, nobody does that. I'm like, I'm not on the hook for your plants ever. And when you say that to somebody, they get it, because I think we're just so used to not having to worry about it. But these are living things. They can die very easily. And depending on the nursery, it is difficult sometimes to get replacement costs. Some nurseries will do replacement within 3 months, 6 months, a week, depending. In places like Ecuador, nobody's going to take a dead plant back. And I imagine the same is true in China. So
Yeah.
I just generally don't manage that aspect of it. And if I do, I charge for it. I charge very well for it because it's a huge headache. Yeah, in terms of design icons, happy to talk about it. Did you want to share your link and we can go through?
Oh, well, actually, I've fixed it.
Okay, great. Perfect.
I'll share what I did because
Please.
it's uh, I actually redid the design on Photoshop so that I could specifically have layers
Yeah.
over, because I haven't quite managed to figure that all out in PowerPoint.
Well, there's
So
no layers. So yeah,
there is no layers, right?
yeah,
But you can have no, there is no layers, right? So
none. You didn't lack in figuring it out. It did not exist.
I thought there was some slides where you could hide or something on
Yeah,
PowerPoint.
so the few hacks I found as I've become far too intimate with this program is, one, you could put things in the background, or you could put things as a background template slide. And so that
Yeah,
gives you a
yeah, yeah,
singular layer to play with. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So anyway, so the PowerPoint um, design has all these layers, but it looked horrible on the grayscale.
Oh, okay.
It looked like a what's that? I can't think of the fruit salad. You know, like that really bright coloured
Sure,
fruit
sure.
salad. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, and it just it didn't look right. But I played around with it, and I found uh, on the layer you can click into um, internal shadow
Oh, nice.
and give it a little bit of a shadow, and then all the icons just pop off.
Perfect.
Yeah, and it looks really good.
Oh,
So,
that's
well,
fantastic.
I think it does. Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. But it's it does make a huge difference. So if anybody's doing it on PowerPoint, it's a little tip.
Yeah, and something I would say is that the United Designers, run by United Designers International, I'll just pull it up here, run by Daniel Housley. If folks are keen and they want to go the Adobe route, he has a great course that takes you through his process of designing on Adobe. I brought Dan up back when he was still using paper, up to Canada when I started, and the great thing is that he has an entire database of all of these different types of sizing requirements that will size automatically. So, if you are keen on doing something like that, there can be some value in that. The costing of it, I think he just switched it to like 3 different prices. Go down to the bottom here. Yeah, so there's like the basic with the course video, there's professional, which is direct feedback, access to the natural capital database, planning tools, plant symbols, template libraries, all that good stuff. And then there's the expert package, which I think is lifetime. So, if you want somebody who's figured out an entire system that you can just plug and play into what you're doing, this can be a good option. I believe, I haven't found the person yet who's done this, but because Affinity is so close to Adobe, I believe you could take the same concepts and basically rebuild everything in Affinity, but there may not be things that are exactly the same. There has been a little bit of critique about Dan and United Designers that sometimes they aren't as um, ground specific. Sometimes they design too much on the computer. And I think I've said this many times to folks here. It's one of the reasons why you need to see the site and be on the site as much as you do, because the map is never the territory, and you can fall in love with these pretty pictures, which is one of the reasons why I like having my pictures being very basic. So that way, one, they're easy to write, easy to read, easy to understand. I just went through a planting plan with 2 clients this weekend, and it's all lines and colors. That's it. It's just very simple because I want it to be simple to them and I want to be able to redraw it quickly. So generally, it just depends on what you want to do and where you want to go. If you're going to go into this long term and you'd like to do graphic design and you'd like something that's totally made for you, and then United Designers is a good spot to play in. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say to your question there, Leon, is pretty consistently what clients have told me over and over again, if it's like a day visit, a site visit that's added to a design, is generally I save people somewhere between the $5 to $150,000 on a site visit. It's just one of those things that when I leave, people are like, I would have never thought of that. I would have put that in the wrong place. And so I don't really have an issue with charging appropriately for a site visit because you can produce so much value for a client in a short amount of time. Just not putting the wrong thing in the wrong place, putting it in front of water. You know, there's so many people who place things in front of water or they don't look up into the watershed. You know, the plants and everything else can be well understood and designed out from the outset. But the last time I did a site visit, I was leaving Canada and somebody said, "Hey, would you mind coming over for a half day?" And I did. And they were like, that was the cheapest return on value investment I think I've ever had, because by the end of the day, I had located 3 different sites for ponds. I hadn't designed them. I just looked at the landscape and was like, wow, this is a great spot. You know, if you bring in an excavator, dig here, see if you can find a clay or clay layer. And if not, just know that this water body will be more leaking than other water bodies, and all water bodies leak. But the great thing is if you wanted to do an orchard below a leaky water body, generally your water is taken care of. So this is one of the things that as designers, you folks are now eligible to expand your knowledge and awareness of, and actually provide a huge amount of value for the folks that you work with. So yeah, it's a piece to think about, especially when clients are interested. Any other follow-up questions about that series of questions or design business related conversations before we jump down to Shawani's questions?
Javan, I do have a question.
Please.
If I may, I had some difficulties locating or finding a plant that would aid the tree guilds in supplying some nitrogen.
Okay.
Now, I recently discovered a plant that is called Baptisia, and is very pretty and is native to this area, which is even more exciting. However, when I started researching a little bit more about it, I got stuck a little bit on the root system, because I understand that the root systems actually can go as deep as 20 feet down. It's like a tap type of root system and very dense, very difficult to move if you plant it on the wrong site. And so I wanted to pose the question out there to see if anybody have used the plant before, if there is any feedback, whatever, you know, like, and we don't need to take the whole class, but if there's any feedback that you could provide me, please, because I'm desperately looking for something that can give me that nitrogen fixer into the guild.
So false indigo is one of the rock star nitrogen fixers in that humid northeastern area of North America. It's a great pollinator. It's a great niching plant. It goes well with others. It has a beautiful bloom and a nice I'll just bring it up here so folks can actually see what it looks like, because it's a nice one. So yeah, it's got a beautiful bloom to it. It's got a really interesting sort of upside down candelabra shape, so it's quite tight and then moves out, so it fills in well around other things. It really does open up soil quite well. And I think in your situation, it would be a great plant. I would have 0 reservations about it in a site like yours. The great thing about Baptisia as well is because it's a pollinator, it's also a pollinator nitrogen fixer. So it's going to do a lot of attraction of pollinators, but it's also going to create a lot of ornamental value as well, because it's quite pretty. You know, it's got that sort of columnar flower, but it still has a bouquet approach, unlike a hollyhock or some of the pure columnar flowers. but it's a very nice flower that I think would go well on your site.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Awesome. Any other follow-up questions before we jump into the next series? Happy, joy. Okay, cool. All right, from Shawani. As the course will be completed on June 3rd, till how long will we be able to access the course, all the valuable study materials and video and links? So according to the website, under course access, it says you will have access to your course for 2 years from the end date of the course. My question is regarding water management, placement of on-contour swale, especially on the higher elevation on the ridge. Javan, in your experience, which location is better suited for building houses, above the swale or just below the swale? Can overflow spillways make the building structure below muddy and moldy? Please put some insight into this. So let's start with first principles always. So all of your assets on your site, regardless of biotic, abiotic, living, dead, doesn't matter, are either dry assets or wet assets or semi-wet assets. Some of your assets like water, some of your assets need water, and some of your assets degrade with water. Homes are a dry asset. Generally, all structures are. They need to remain dry. So generally, we want a good hat and a big pair of boots on all of our buildings. It means we want a high foundation and we've got a really big hat to make sure that we have no rain damage, but also secondarily, especially in the tropics, but pretty much everywhere as we move into fully climate changed and into climate chaos, we want to make sure that the eaves are long enough so that way you don't have sun that directly hits the building itself. This is one of the main issues in the tropics, as well as orthographic hot, dry places like the prairies in North America, is that if that sun hits your wall system, it heats up more than anything else. So we try to keep the summer sun off of the wall system. And then another reason why we talk about solar angles, that in the winter, we want to make sure that that wall system gets as much sun as possible. So first and foremost, good hat, big pair of boots. Second is put them out of harm's way. So if there's drainages specifically on a site, don't put your infrastructure in your drainages. Don't put your infrastructure in potential flooding zones. Nathan's on the call here. We've had a lot of chats about his river backing up and filling into his landscape. And one of the things that is important to realize is that there's going to be influences on your site that you don't have any action or responsibility on. He can't change the river. He can't change the river's watershed. Those are things that are outside of his control. What he can change is potentially creating a very vegetated, highly vegetated berm that can help to dissuade some of that water onto the property and hopefully turn it into productive vegetative material. Folks haven't seen Nathan's design. I highly recommend it. It's a very interesting design, specifically the berm design in either, what was it, Zone 1 or is it in the plant system design, Nathan?
The berm is, I guess, will be technically in zone 2.
Right, but in
And,
the
the food
assignment,
forest
which
as well.
assignment would they go to take a look at that?
Oh, which assignment? Oh, sorry. Geez, I have to look.
No worries. Well, it's one of the two.
Assignment 8, I'm still working at. Yeah, it's one of the two, 7 or 8.
Week 7 or 8, not assignment 7 or 8.
8, I'm just finishing up.
Oh yeah. So I think then what it is,
I'm just
is
finishing up.
it would be the plant system design then, because you're probably just doing zone 1 now. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, but great work. And I think people should check it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, man. You've done a great job. In terms of infrastructure, especially buildings where you're going to inhabit, at the top of the hill is generally where it's the windiest. So generally wind will come up and through a hill and they'll burst over the top. And in temperate climates, you have to be conscientious because wind can remove 40% of the heat from a building, can also remove 40% of the weight from an animal. So you need to have shelter for animals, both Homo sapien and all the rest of them. We're all animals. You have to make sure the animals are out of the wind's way. So the top of the hill is the windiest. The bottom is the coldest because cold air sinks. So generally at the bottom, a lot of people do this. They get into the valley. They put their roads in the valley. The valleys belong to water. They put their homes in the valley. The valley belongs to water. And so they end up having to have sump pumps and things like that. But generally mid slope is a thermocline. where it's not too warm, not too cool. It's just right. And it tends to be a nice place to put it. So generally, I try to find sort of mid-slope areas to place it. In places that are inundated with wildfire, I also do not like to put a house at the top. Fire burns uphill. And so generally, when the fire burns uphill after it's gone through a hill, at the top, it's usually at its apex of its total burn. So I don't like to place a house directly there. Great place to put a wind turbine, but terrible place to put a house. How deep should we dig the pond to hold the water? Are there any rules of thumb for dimensions of dams? So this is like that old joke. I'd like a couple of 2x4s. How long do you want them? I want them for a long time. I'm building a house. It's really about, with ponds, it's about the land shape. So you have to take a look at the land shape. And again, the process, we've talked about this before, but the process is find inflection points first. So find places that go from convex to concave. Those are what's called inflection points. And usually right after the inflection point, remember the violence of the raindrop. The raindrop comes down, hits bare earth, splits up the sand, silt, and clay, which is inside a soil bed, gets into solution, goes downhill. And after that convex, it has a moment to stop. And that retardation of inertia then gives an opportunity for the sand, the silt, and the clay to lay out in that order, which is generally why we take a look at inflection points, because one, the way the shape is, if we dig into that area, chances are we can move the least amount of soil for the most amount of water impoundment. And the second is we tend to find clay. So once we find those inflection points, or we find places where as we're walking, we feel it cooler, or we're walking and we see reeds and grasses, or we're walking and we feel our feet go sloosh, 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 or we see water. Those are all really good indications that this is a good spot to develop a pond. And then usually what we'll do is we'll go in and do what's called a test slice. So that's taking in an excavator backhoe, which is usually the minimum that we'll use. That can be in a mini X format all the way up to a 5 or 10 ton machine. Basically, we're taking the arm and we're digging out scoop by scoop, and then we're usually doing a hand test every single scoop, and we're laying out at least one scoop from that dig to take a look at it and go, okay, we're laying it out as it is. This is the depth of it. And so at 6 feet, looks like we're finally into 30, 40, 50, 60% clay. Fantastic. Go deeper. Okay, under 6 feet, there's gravel. Under 6 feet, there's glacial till. Under 6 feet, it's river rock. So basically, we have a line of clay at 6 feet, which then tells us our pond can only be 6 feet. Yeah, you got her. So it's really dependent on what we have for materials if we're trying to create a water body that leaks the least. All water bodies leak. All water bodies leak. Even if they're made with EPDM, which is a pond liner, eventually that leaks. So just know if you're doing earthen or if you're doing plastic or plastic-esque type liners, they all leak eventually, or they all leak right at the beginning. Over time, what will happen though, is if you're using materials that aren't the best, so let's say like 40% of clay and under, over time, that water in that water body will slowly start to create what we call gley, G-L-E-Y, gley soils. And those gley soils are the soils that if you're ever a kid walking in a pond or walking near a water body like a fen or a slough, and you took a step and your foot came out of your boot because the soil or the mud held your boot, that's that glaying property. That's that water impermeable property, semi-impermeable property that can develop over time. So I've developed ponds that we knew weren't going to hold water in year 1. And finally, by year 4, it was holding water. The other thing is have different depths to avoid evapotranspiration. We've talked about this before. You have a single pond with a single depth. It all heats up together and it all evaporates together. This was the problem I found in Kenya. So you want to have deep sections. So in one area or another, you want to have deep sections. Also, because of the different type of invertebrates, reptiles, amphibians, you usually want a little ramp or walkway to go into the water. This is also true for things like dragonfly larvae. Dragonfly larvae do not like to be in steep drops, and dragonfly larvae are your best defense against mosquitoes. So if you don't have shallow inlets into your water body, you're not going to have a lot of biological predation upon some of the more pesky insects that can grow in these areas. once we find that impermeable layer, that clay layer, what we'll do is we'll develop a keyway. So if we've got a sloped area, we're going to dig into the bottom area, and that's basically going to be dug directly into the impermeable layer, and then we're going to borrow clay from up outside of the pond in the borrow pond, pardon me, the borrow pit, and we're going to use that clay and we're going to build up the keyway, which is basically the dam wall in clay. And then we'll pack dirt on the other sides of it. But basically what happens is you have a liner at the bottom of clay, and then you've got your dam wall, and then you can put your soil around it. And that's generally how we'll line up a pond. Develop keyway, all bodies leak, the type of soil. Yeah, exactly. So those are some of the rules of thumb in terms of developing it. The size is completely up to you, what you want, how much availability you have. Generally, and we've talked about this before, if the dam depth, not low depth, but depth, or call it length across the surface, is 1 to 2 times the length of the dam wall, we tend to say that that is a very economical pond. So I'm just going to draw that out for folks. So say we've got our dam wall here. That's our dam wall. And say our pond comes back quite a bit, something like this, because that's the contour of it. We would say that would be a very economical dam, because the length here would basically be 1 to 2 times. So this would be the length and the depth or the length of the pond there. So that's generally a very economic pond. Sometimes we're going to dig ponds that are just there to hold water indeterminately, and they're ephemeral ponds, and they fill up and drain down and fill up and drain down. New Forest Farm, Mark Shepard down in, is he in Virginia? No, that's Joel Salatin. He's in the Northeast someplace there. But he also wrote Regenerative Agriculture. He does a lot of ephemeral ponds to great effect. That's been very useful for him. I see something in the chat. I'm just going to check. Preach, Javan. I shall preach. I shall preach. Sky, thank you. I don't know what it was about, but I will continue. Is it advisable to build many dams in the tropics as they can reflect back heat on buildings to make them more warm, or can it be a breeding ground for mosquitoes? So really depends on the site. Again, in the tropics, if we can find a good wind corridor, I like putting in ponds that have multiple depths. They tend not to heat up so much, and they could actually cool down a building. This was true in pretty much the entire Arab nation. They would do courtyard buildings. They would do ponds in the center and ponds outside, directly facing to the wind, and the wind would come in and bring cooling air into the courtyard. And then they usually had a big tall tower to basically pull heat up, so they would have a draft open in the house. So it really depends. In terms of mosquitoes, that's the big thing about not making the dam or not making the water body a singular depth. If it has multiple depths, especially a deep section up to 6 feet, 2 meters, chances are you're never going to get to that heat level that there's going to be an issue with mosquitoes, especially if you have that tapered edge to allow for different types of invertebrate. And basically, once you build it and then it fills for the first rain, you can then go and do pond dipping, go to an existing pond that looks very healthy, take a big bucket of water, and then inoculate your pond. We do the same thing with soils. So we'll take a bucket or 2 of mud from those ponds and bring it in. Sometimes we'll completely plant out. We'll take a whole section of reeds and sedges and cattails and other types of aquatic materials, and we'll actually bring them into the pond to jumpstart that natural flywheel that really starts to produce a lot of the ecology that we're looking for. But those, plus adding in a couple of fish, I've never had a problem with a pond and mosquitoes that's well established within the ecology. So it's never really been a big issue. And then the other thing is more warm because of that reflection. It's a great point. So in a place where you're dealing with, I'll draw this out, in a place where you're dealing with, in a lot of the tropics closer to the equator, that means the angle of the sun is more acute. Doesn't mean it's pretty, just means it's steep. And nobody laughing at my cute joke. That's fine. I don't mind. It's all right. Okay, people laughing now at me laughing at my cute joke. Good. So if this is our house, let's say, and say we've been smart and we've made the roof angles so that way the summer sun can't hit it, because we're smart permaculturalists. So that sun can't get there. But let's say we had a pond now. So we've got a water body. Now it can. So this is what Shawani is talking about, and it's a smart conversation. So that can be an issue. Anybody see what the immediate potential design implementation here could be to dissuade this from happening? Thoughts?
Planting.
Planting. So if we do a small hedge, or if we do a small planting, basically around the pond, which we should be doing anyways, something like so, and something probably without it being highlighted. There we go. So now we've got a little bit of deflection, and we might make that a little bit higher, or we may decide, because of where we are in the tropics, we're actually going to come in here and we're going to design this whole issue without being an issue. And we're going to move that pond further away so that way the wind can hit it, but the sun can't. So that's just playing with the sun angles. So it's further enough away so that way that solar angle that we're picking arbitrarily, just there's no way it would ever bounce back towards, there we go, towards that building. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Yep, nodding. Okay, great. Awesome. Good, really good question, Shawani. I know you're not here, but hopefully you can come to it later. Highly grateful for your guidance. Definitely fell in love with permaculture. Nice. It's a good thing to fall in love with, I can say. Okay, great. Those are all the active questions we have. I'm not saying anything in the chat. What else do we want to chat about with our final 20 minutes?
Hey, Javan, I have a quick question. I'm wondering if you can just talk about a little bit. Can you just talk about the permaculture take on natives versus non-natives?
Yeah, sure. So you've asked your question in an interesting way, and I appreciate it. Mollison had his own approach. David Holmgren has his own approach. Then there's the sort of general approach that permaculturalists take. So I'm going to go for that one because Bill's, I think, exact words were, if the locals aren't going to do the work, then the hardworking immigrants will. I think that was his brash way of saying, and this is more now into the mainstream of permaculture, if there is such a thing. It's kind of an oxymoron. Plants move, seeds move. They do the world over. I was just recently in the Galapagos, and seeds traveled those 2,000 kilometers on storms and animals to get to the Galapagos. That's how they got there. It was a volcanic, and there's constantly creating volcanic new islands off Ferdinand. On the west-hand side, there's new volcanic material being created, and all of the plants, all of the animals traveled there somehow. And most of the issues of human introduced animals and plants haven't been as huge of an issue as we might have think or seen as in places like Australia or France or other places. So generally there's this conversation of, if you're going to talk about what is an invasive, we have to talk about context. So we have to talk about time, and we have to talk about area, because those plants inherently are going to move through the geological and the climatic epochs of our planet. We used to have this great, we used to tell this great story on the second day of the PDC. And this is because when I took my PDC, the instructor, Brandon Bauer, who's now become a very close personal friend, he sat everybody down the second night and said, hey, everybody, this is the great thing about taking an in-person PDC. It's a magical experience. You know, you learn for 8 hours a day and you're like, I can't take any more. And then somebody says, hey, I'm going to give a chat, or I'm going to tell a story at 8, bring a beer. And everybody does. And you sit around a campfire. And Brandon told this amazing story about how, and I had never heard this perspective. And then I researched it. And I was like, no, this is right. How there's really never been a non-agricultural human enclave. We've always been semi-agricultural. We've always been hunter and gatherers, and we always had a little bit of agriculture, because as we were traveling through areas, we would find a beautiful apple and we would eat our fill and we'd fill our packs. And then as we were going along, the kids would go along the side of the road and make their fertility deposits. And we might actively plant as we went. We're like, this is a great spot. We should try and extend what's here. But over time, we would have developed those corridors on those places in areas that would have date palms that now are temperate forests. So there is this question of epoch. And if we have the narrowest view possible, there's going to be what's called unwanted plants. There's going to be plants that we don't want there for some reason or another. Outside of ecology, nature doesn't care about our feelings. Nature doesn't care about how we feel about the plants. So this is a purely human issue that we then place our emotional perspective on. Generally, there's a conversation that there's an imbalance in an area, like eutrophic ponds and streams where there's too much nitrogen fertilizer. You get a bloom of specific type of plants that need to eat up that nitrogen. It uses up the oxygen, and then we have an oxygen dead zone in a body of water. So it's usually an imbalanced conversation. And so one of the questions when we're teaching the ecology section is really about what's in balance here and what's out of balance here. So if you come to a place and it's a house that has a whole yard that's been flattened and put into grass, the whole thing's a disturbed area. So we're not surprised. We shouldn't be surprised when we see dandelion and plantain and thistle. It's like the genetic bank that is the soil is going, well, wait up. We're not supposed to be bare. Let's use all of our hardiest plants to pop up and start to stabilize that soil. And so a lot of the pioneers are prickly, pernicious, poisonous, but they also like to break up soil. They also like to hold soil. So generally we have thick tubers. We have lots of root matting that basically holds onto soil and keeps it together. Dao Ryan wrote an incredible book called Beyond the War on Invasives. She's one of the instructors and one of the admins for this course. She goes into this whole topic in depth. But basically what I do is when I'm talking to people, I go back to that very first story, because at the end of that story, when Brandon finished and we were all sitting there around the fire and some of our minds had been freshly blown because I grew up in the city. Like I don't have that ecological background. I had to learn everything. I was sitting there and I was like, okay, so Brandon, what you're saying is weeds is just racism for plants? And it was a dawning moment for me. I was like, oh, it's just this terrible name we call a plant who's just doing its thing. And it's true. So that doesn't mean that there aren't plants that have advantageously taken over an area, but who's to say without humans, they wouldn't have found their way here and started to develop a population and a colony and spread. So I guess my approach is I try to downgrade the invasives and weeds. I always balance it with the burden of design is on the designer. So we have to be very aware not to put advantageous plants in places that it could really get away from a site. This has been no more highlighted by the obsession of the cold temperate climates like Canada and northern states with plants like Elaeagnus multiflora, umbellata, and augustifolia, which are the gumi family, and their total demonization in the southeast of America, where they get into waterways and they just spread rampant. So there's a conversation there that they're trying to fix up the nitrogen that's coming in from the waterways, and there's a fair bit of good research about that. But basically, I try not to be so harsh about the plants and go like, cool, there may be a plant here that I feel is unwanted, but I'm willing to take on that ownership and go, that's my responsibility. I don't want that plant there because aesthetics, because I just don't want it. I did a course with Jeff Lawton years ago, and he made one of the best statements about this. He goes, it's really easy to have a job for life. Just hate something, go outside your door, and it's kind of like you not only have blinders on, but also a screen where you're only going to see what you're going to see because whatever you hate is actually being obscured. You can't actually see what the plant is for, what it's doing. And so we had a lovely conversation about how there's never been a war on invasive plants that has been won, but it gives people a reason for being for their entire life. And I thought that was probably the most poetic thing I'd ever heard. So that's generally my take. There's going to be advantageous plants you want to get rid of. You know, for example, it's funny. I being in Ecuador, I have an aesthetic. There's an Ecuadorian aesthetic, and people love keeping their driveways free of plants. And it's the number one use of Roundup. They just like spray the gravel. And we have let the plants come into the gravel. And now our landlord is like, that's not how I gave you the house. And it's true. That's a true statement. And so now I'm going back to some of the non-chemical, the non-man-made chemical herbicides, things like a gallon of vinegar, a cup of salt, a couple of drops of Dawn, mix it up, apply liberally on the plants, do it again in a couple of days. It takes 5 or 6 applications, but at the same time, I'm not putting a neurotoxin into the landscape where my dog and my husband and friends and family come to visit. So it's just a question about understanding, again, as Shawani talked about, like falling in love with a holistic way of thinking, like, cool, this is something that kills things and I'm putting it into the landscape I live. Let's have a conversation about that. That might be a bad idea. Like we have so much toxicity in the human body, and like there's no mother's milk. And there was just a study that was released that out of a study of, I think, close to 3,000 men, there was not one testy that they didn't find microplastics in. Like that means the toxicity that we've created in the planet is widespread, and it's affecting us all at some level. So I just try to take a kind of a broader, more holistic view and go, what is this plant? What is its job here? Like I try to understand the plant before I pull it. That's been my create friction aspect. So I'm like, cool, I don't know what that plant is. I probably shouldn't pull it until I know what it is. And this saved me a couple of years ago. I hadn't been around lamb's quarter because on the coast, we really didn't see a lot of it. We had things like chickweed and miner's lettuce, all of these like early pioneer weeds that were edible. And so I came out to the interior British Columbia, and there was this thing called lamb's quarter. And I was like, it's everywhere. I do this work for a living, but I'm growing a garden, so I'm getting rid of it. And then a buddy of mine, we ran this course called Family Food Security. She's been growing food for her family of 5 for close to 10 years. She's been doing all the canning. It's a great course. If anybody's interested in food security, I can't recommend it enough. And she said this one little thing in like lesson 3. She's like, oh yeah, and this year I just stopped growing spinach, and I just picked all my lamb's quarter, dried it and powdered it. And now it's my my mineral supplement and my vegetable supplement for the year. I was like, hold up. Can we talk about this? And so that year I did 2 things very differently. 1, I picked all my lamb's quarter and ate it. And 2, I allowed lamb's quarter into, I used to do, and this is good for everybody in temperate climates, I used to do a winter crop. So I would do carrots, spinach, kales, and lamb's quarter. So in my bed of planted kale, if lamb's quarter came up, I left it, and I would poly it before the first rain in the fall. And this is really important. If you want to store anything in the ground, you have to make sure that the rain doesn't get to it, because then you can actually just pull it out. You can take the 2 feet of snow off the top and then pull out the carrot and then put the cover back on. But then I had all this lamb's quarter in like February, March, and April, when there was nothing else growing in the area. I had all of this incredibly hardy, nutritiously dense material. So that's a long and winding road around my approach to unwanteds, and just my way of slowly starting to roll back the invasive conversation and the racism, the weed conversation. And also the reason why I don't get invited anymore to conservationist talks. I used to get invited to conservationist talks a lot. And then I would start to talk about the most invasive thing on the planet. And the people didn't like talking about themselves. And it was a fun conversation, because it's like on the coast of Western British Columbia, we have this ecosystem called the Garry Oak ecosystem. And so it has big, tall Garry Oaks, has a few understories, not much, but then it has these camas bulbs. And the camas bulbs are there because the First Nations, the Salish and the Coast Salish, they planted out that ecosystem and they managed it with fire. And so you have all these Garry Oak ecosystem folks who invited me to this talk. It was on a movie called A Chemical Reaction, all about how this push in Quebec to stop ornamental herbicide application. They're trying to create parallels. They were like, well, the Garry Oak ecosystem, like, what are we supposed to do with all these unwanteds that are there? I'm like, where are the unwanteds? Well, they're by the concrete pathways. Oh, cool. This anthropological ecosystem that was managed by First Nations, you've put a wheelchair accessibility path in, and now you have all this Scotch broom that's growing beside it. Isn't that interesting? Let's have a conversation about that. Let's talk about bringing back the fire. Let's talk about anything except for the fact that you have a plant you don't like there. And that kind of conversation is hard for people because in many ways we're hardwired to hate something and to become xenophobic through it. And it's, you know, as a tribal organization, as a tribal species, pardon me, kept us alive for a long time. The other was problematic. The problem is that we've grown kind of beyond that in many ways. And so we have to be very conscientious that these days it's really about understanding right plant, right place. And if the plant is there, it's probably the right place. We probably don't have the education to understand it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks for allowing me to do the rant.
That was good.
All right, folks, any other questions?
I got about 1,000,001 questions for you, Javan, but I'll wait till you get to the coast and we can have a nice long chat.
Sounds good, man. Sounds good. Yeah, look,
Been a great teacher for the course. I appreciate everything, by the way.
You're most welcome, sir. You're most welcome. Pleasure. Yeah, looking forward to coming and doing a site visit and walk, talk. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll
Cool.
be sweet.
Cool, folks. Cool. All right. Well,
I've got
go ahead.
one question. Is the permaculture what do they call it? World Permaculture Forum
Oh,
is in
Permaculture
Taiwan.
Global.
Is in Taiwan this year? Is anybody going to that?
Oh, the International Permaculture Convergence, the IPC.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Andrew's going because he's presenting. I know Jude Hobbs is going, Marisha's going, a buddy of mine, Monica Ibeck, who's head of the Permaculture Institute of North America, is going. I'm not going. I have no more days left of my temporary visa. I cannot be outside of this country until March of 2025. So I'm effectively country landlocked. The IPC is very cool. I'll just kind of make a pitch for the IPC. I got into permaculture in 2009. I think that was the year that it was in Jordan. And then the IPC then was in Cuba in 2013. So I went down, and usually what there is there's a PDC before. Sometimes there's a PTT, a permaculture teacher training before that. Then there's the conference, and then there's the convergence. So the conference is more like big names, big people doing big things, and them talking about it, kind of set. There's not usually multi-track. And then in the convergent, there's multi-track, and it's kind of like everybody's kind of sharing what they're doing. Sometimes there's working groups, sometimes there's, it's just kind of all over the place. And then usually post-convergence, there's local tours. And so in and around Taiwan, it looks like the local tours look really cool. Like, I wish I was going. But it looks like there's a really great pre-PDC, PDC, and then the convergence and the conference, and then all the rest of it. So Taiwan's a place I've always wanted to visit. I think because you're in China, it makes perfect sense for you to go. And if you can make it, I would. Yeah, it's a good one. I don't know where it's going to be after that, but it should be a fun conversation. Okay. I've got 5 minutes, so I want to take a couple minutes and talk about post-PDC conversations, where to go, what to do, what's next. So a PDC makes you dangerous. It makes you very dangerous because you've heard a bunch of things and you're thinking some things, and generally there's a thought that you are smarter, better, more aware than others, and you're not. Please, for the love of everything that you've been taught, do not go to a farmer and tell them, I know more than you. Please don't do that. Please don't be that permaculturalist. I really cannot say enough. Don't be that person. You know enough to share. You know enough to talk. You know enough to learn more. So post PDC, there tends to always be a few people who are like, I just want to make a food forest. That's the only thing. I'm going to make food forest the world over. And it's always a young group of guys in the PDC when I used to teach them live. And it's always a question of like, great guys, have you ever planted a tree before? Nah. Have you ever run a business before? No. Cool. You have enthusiasm. You're eligible to learn more. So what I would say is, as I started at the beginning, that fire and compost list, if you haven't done that throughout the course, that's okay. but just think about like what's fired you up in the course and what's been like, okay, you know, it's been all right. It hasn't been everything, but it's been an okay thing to have. And the great thing about that idea of fire and compost is it gives you a short list of what to do next. And so all those elements that you might be interested in, ask 3 questions. 1, do I currently have any skill in this? And some of these things you may not, but you may have come into the course with skill, and it may be transferable into some element, maybe transferable into rainwater harvesting because you understand plumbing, or you're a little handy, you're spatially aware. You may really like working with kids. Okay, great. That almost immediately suggests a pathway that would be useful. So that kind of directs you. The second question you want to ask is, do I enjoy this as it is? So is this just, and it's in the fire list, it's kind of a double check, because after the PDC, you're like, well, I don't really ever want to do a climatic analysis again. That was a ton of work. I get a lot of questions during the PDC, like, do you do all of this for a client? And the answer is no, because we don't, some of these assignments are really specific to you, but I always do a climate analysis. I always get a sense of what there is. I do a sector analysis, microclimate, things like that. And then the last question I like asking, and this was a question that I only came up to after a couple of years of being in this work, is this idea, concept, skill, is it regenerative to me? So am I more for it after I'm involved with it? So I love teaching, like hopefully that comes through. I get a little high off of my Mondays, and it kind of carries me throughout the day. I love doing site visits, carries me throughout the day. But you can, and a lot of people do this, they, 1, get into permaculture, and 2, get into topics in permaculture because they think they ought to. And I want to warn you all against that. It's a great way to burn yourself out quickly, thinking this is what the world needs, this is what I need to be doing for the world. Don't do it. Really take a moment to go, what here is of interest to me because of me? What is intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated? And the question I've asked to understand this for myself is, am I more for this? After I do it, work on it, get excited by it, does it leave me feeling excited and like I want to learn more? Or does it make me feel like, my God, I never want to touch that again? Years ago, I was doing regenerative mentorship, business design mentorship, and a colleague of mine, Lila Darwish, who wrote an incredible book called Earth Repair, working with phytoremediation, microremediation, really about pulling heavy metals and toxins out of soil. She was like, I hate mapping. Mapping is my least favorite thing in permaculture. I was like, then don't map. She's like, what do you mean don't map? I have to map. I'm a permaculturalist. Like, don't map. Find somebody who can map for you. Guild with somebody else. You're the apple tree. You're not the gooseberry. You're not the false indigo. Just like work with somebody else to do the thing you don't like to do. Eventually, you may find yourself getting into it and liking it and loving it. But at the beginning, don't worry about it. Like, do the bare minimum you need to get the information you want, and then move forward. Like, don't get upset. Don't get frustrated by it. And that has served me so well, because I tried to do everything at the beginning, and shockingly, I failed. And now I do exactly what I love doing, and I do it remarkably well. And that just continues on as I move. I become more and more and more niched, or more and more myself. There's all this expression within us that wants to be expressed. When we're young, we have 2 needs: the need to be loved and the need to be accepted by our family. It's the 2 psychological needs we have. Most of our neuroses and most of our personalities are built out of not getting these needs met, mostly the need to express ourselves. So this is a great moment, and it's great because it's permaculture and it's a holistic process to really go, cool, who am I now? What wants to come through me and be expressed? And this has been a great buffet, but you don't eat the buffet every day. You go through the buffet, and when you go up for your second plate, which is where you're at now, what's my next plate? I liked rainwater harvesting. That was great. I really liked human urine composting. That was cool. I never want to touch a big water body because I think it's scary, and I never want to be responsible for it failing. Also great. All those things are awesome. All those things are fantastic. But what I would suggest is, if you're going into this to either do your design site, then start to apply and practice and put in elements in your design site that make sense. And if you're doing this to go into business, or doing this to expand what you know, what I would suggest is focus on one new next thing and learn about it, practice it, put it into the ground, play with it. That's how I learned composting. That's how I learned earthworm composting and biochar. And, you know, humans overestimate what they can do in a day and underestimate what they can do in a year or 5 year. And sequencing, logical sequencing of what's next can be a great way to do it. The last thing I'll say is I became a great fan of education, and I took every course under the sun I could. And what I would say now is follow the Greek words for time. One is chronos, the logical progression of time, and the other is kairos, the immediacy of an issue. I now focus on kairos education, and I still do it today. If I need to learn something for a client or something I don't know, I go and I find that information. It can be frustrating if you're taking a course and you don't have a project to apply it. It's the best way to kinesthetically embed the information into you. So if you're coming up to something on your design site, like, oh, I'm going to build a compost pile. Javan told me about that cool cultivating living soils course, and they're going to show me how to compost perfectly. Great. I'll line it up. But just be conscientious about your next steps and to go at it in a thoughtful way. And if you're interested, both of those communities, those memberships might be a great place for you to play. Follow-up questions on that before we have a final feedback round, and then we say our goodbyes. Happy, joy. Sounds good. All right. So just quickly, and you don't have to speak if you don't want to, how was the course for you? What are you taking away? What was the value that you experienced during the course?
Well, I'll start there real quick, Javan. For me personally, considering how close I am to the site, I live right next to it, and how long we've been kind of coming back and forth, this has been pretty amazing and invaluable. Can't really describe how much it's helped, and it's just the start.
Awesome, Nathan. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. You've got a great site. You're gonna go far, man. Yeah, you got the right attitude. Anybody else want to chime in?
I'll just say that I thought it was such a great overview of everything, and that's kind of what I was looking for. I wanted that sort of buffet to understand all the different aspects, or how to approach something and understand all the things that you're looking for when you're looking at a site. So that was really helpful for me. And I like what you were just saying about, picking what kind of really sings to you. Because some of the stuff I was like, dear Lord, I don't think I want to do this every day. But a lot of the other stuff I really got into, and I appreciate all the things that you're kind of saying about learning when you need to, and just going about this as time goes on. So thanks. It's been a really, really interesting course for me. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Courtney. Appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh,
yeah, I'd like to add, Javan, and like Courtney, I think the course for me gave me such a fantastic bedrock. We recently purchased a house on the site where we are now, and so it was absolutely overwhelming to even think about how to tackle, the maintenance and the overgrowth and all of that. And so the course gave me this pathway and structure to look at the place holistically, to steal your word. And so now it's all of these random ideas that we have been bouncing back and forward now have a place, or basically they have been put in the compost pile, and there's some that are on the fire pit and being cooked up for implementation, and actually even creating more children ideas, out of it. So it gave us that very structured way, and very comprehensive, in a way that I was really yearning and wanting to absorb, precisely because I'm not from this area. So there's a lot of knowledge, like indigenous knowledge, or that firsthand knowledge about the plant materials around, that I have no clue about. One thing is to go to a garden center and you know what you know, and what is, fancy, and everybody has in their front garden. But then one thing is when you actually are in the forest or walking around, and you're just like, okay, this plant looks super interesting. What does it do? What is it all about? Who lives here? Why? So all of these things, the course have provided that kind of framework to digest all of this massive amount of valuable information and put it all together in a way that makes sense and makes us better stewardships for what we have and for what we do and intend to do in the future. So thank you so much.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. That's lovely. Thank you so much. Yeah, great. We've got a couple folks. Shawani, hey Javan, I got late for the meeting. Appreciate your help a lot. Thank you very much. The course has given me confidence that I can do it in course of time. Thank you very, very much, Javan. You've been amazing. Audio mic's not working. Thanks so much, Shawani. Yeah, I've loved all your questions and you've done just a phenomenal job. All of you have, the folks who stick with the office hours and the work, you just see this exponential change in your site. So yeah, bravo to all of you. Sky, my mic isn't connected again, but basically the class taught me how little I knew. I actually came into the course thinking I was way ahead of where I was. I honestly didn't plan on helping others prior to this course, but I actually look forward to helping others after more time of in-person practice with my site, and obviously a lot more learning and involvement in the community. The preach was about construction good house, also with a good hat and good boots. I hope to one day have a conversation with you to figure out how we think and why it's so different. Could be helpful to us. Yeah, it's huge. Also, thank you, everyone. I've learned so much. Awesome, folks. Yeah.
Can I say something quick? Sorry. From the beginning to the end, I've learned an enormous amount, and so I'd like to thank you, Javan, for helping me through the whole process, and the university for giving me the opportunity to do it. It is an amazing course, and I'll be plugging it to anybody that sniffs a hint of interest. And I think it's going to be very beneficial for it's definitely going to be life-changing, I think, regards to what I'm going to do with it in the future. So yeah, thanks. It's brilliant.
Oh, you're so welcome, sir. Yeah, you're also very welcome. It's a great pleasure to do this work. I love it. It's what keeps me going and keeps me excited. And I'm just grateful to have such amazing colleagues now. It's a great thing about a post PDC. You're all colleagues. And so, if I can help you in any way afterwards, I tend to give 20 minutes to anybody about anything. So if there's anything I can help you with, fantastic. If you're looking for more one-on-one mentorship, I'd be happy to chat about that. Feel free to send me an email. If you're interested in any of the community memberships or things like that, all the links are in the Q&A. And don't be a stranger. Feel free to send me some updates on your projects. I got a bunch this year. It was great. First time in like 5 years, got 4 or 5 people who sent me updates of like little plantings, big plantings, things that they learned over the time. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and we'll see you next time. Looking forward to seeing everybody's materials. Again, June 3rd, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Everything's due. No extensions possible because we have such a high turnover rate. But yeah, be a pleasure. And then if you haven't seen it yet, June 6th, Dow is operating a Where To from here. And I'll be on the call as well. So if you have further questions on what to do next or where to go next, it can be a great place to go. Yeah. So a couple questions. Can you talk? Yeah. So if, again, 20 minutes about anything, that's fine. If you need to contract more time, we can talk about that. So you can email me at javan@allpointsdesign.ca. Same email I've sent everybody in the course. And that's it for me, guys. Thanks so much. It was grand. Hope to see you again in the future.